Hello, welcome to my Human Anatomy educational video. Today, we will touch on some important contributors that make up the nervous system and allow us to function. Actions, thoughts, and emotions are all controlled by neuron impulses. But first, what's a neuron? Neurons, also known as nerve cells, are specialized cells that transmit and carry electrical impulses throughout the body and are considered to be the main unit of the nervous system. Neurons are so important because they monitor and sense external and internal stimuli, process information, and direct muscle actions. But exactly how does a neuron accomplish these tasks? The answer to this question lies in a neuron structure. The most significant section of a neuron structure is the long extensions of the cell body, which is also called a soma. There are two types of nerve fibers that make up these extensions, and that is the dendrite and the axon. Dendrites are these branches from the soma that are responsible for receiving signals and conducting them towards the cell body. Axons, on the other hand, are extensions that conduct these electrical signals away from the cell body and passes these signals to neighboring neurons or target cells through its ends. Dendrites and axons both can extend far away from the cell body, which allows these nerve fibers to reach many different types of target cells. Now that we have a more concrete understanding about the neuron structure, we can now focus on how these neurons' impulses are carried out. Taking a closer look at a section of a neuron dendrite, we see that when the nerve fiber is not receiving or transmitting a signal, it is in a resting state, which means that the cell has a net negative charge and the outside of the cell has a net positive charge. When negative and positive charges exist on both sides of a membrane, the neuron is said to be polarized. Polarized states can be manipulated actively by the neuron through sodium-potassium pumps and ions. The sodium pumps allow 3 positively charged sodium ions out of the cell for every 2 positively charged potassium ions it pumps into the cell. These cycles of releasing and receiving ions increase polarization. In addition to this, potassium also leaks across the cell by diffusion, which creates a more negative charge in the cell and a more positive charge outside the membrane. When a dendrite receives a chemical or electrical signal, the sodium channel, which are usually in a closed state, open, which induces an influx of positive sodium ions into the localized region of the cell, depolarizing that section of the neuron. This influx causes neighboring sodium channels to also open, triggering a chain reaction. This reaction can be related to a wave of depolarization across the membrane, which begins at the dendrite that receives the signal, moving towards the cell body, across the cell body, and then away from the cell down the axon. A great example of this sequence can be seen in the audience of a sports game. Picture the crowd starting a wave. As a section stands up, the following neighboring section also stands up until the next section stands up, and so on. And just like these people, when the wave passes over their section, the members usually sit down and recover until triggered again. This is seen also in neurons when they repolarize. Repolarization is achieved through the closing of these sodium channels, along with the sodium-potassium pumps mentioned earlier, increasing production, which in turn restabilizes the charges across the membrane. Once repolarization occurs, the neuron reaches polarization and returns to its normal state, awaiting for its next trigger. Now that we established how a neuron structure responds to a signal, it's time to analyze how these signals are passed to another neuron or targeting cell. Axons, towards their end, split into several smaller branches that much resemble tree roots. The end of these branches terminate at another cell, but not physically, as there are small junctions called synapses between the receiving target cell and the giving neuron. When the depolarization wave reaches the synapse, it initiates a release of neurotransmitters, which are signaling molecules used to pass a signal from the axon ends to the target cell membrane, where they can diffuse on the target cell's surface, which has a lot of different types of receptors and are responsible for allowing certain neurotransmitters to bind. These receptors are coupled to ion channel proteins and thus control or influence when they open and close. For instance, when an excitatory neurotransmitter successfully binds to its receptor, the receptor then in turn opens and the ion channel which allows sodium to enter into the cell and causes the target cell to depolarize, triggering a reaction. Contrary to this is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, which influences the activation of a different ion channel responsible for the influx of chloride, which negatively charges the cell and causes it to increase polarization of a target and decreases the probability of depolarization, even if the cell receives excitatory signals at the same time. So, today you learned the structure of a neuron being an axon, dendrite, and soma, how signals are received and transferred through the cell by influx and efflux of calcium and sodium channels and pumps, and how signals are transferred into a target cell. Thank you for listening.